Welcome back to another episode of Spartan Theology. The other day, Pinecreek had a conversation with Gary Habermas, and I watched a little bit of the beginning and thought it was pretty interesting, so I kind of turned it off and figured I'd do a video kind of reacting to it and giving my thoughts. Um, yeah, I'm sure most people that are watching my channel are familiar with both Pinecreek, that's his YouTube channel name, his name's actually Doug, and Gary Habermas, who's famous basically for being an apologist that made the minimal facts argument for the resurrection. And if you're not familiar with that, which I'm assuming most people are, so I'm not really going to go too much in depth, but he just gives like his 5 or 6, minimal facts that are agreed upon by a bunch of historians and says the best way to account for all these facts is the resurrection. So, and I don't really agree with his approach. I don't think this type of argument is very good. I'm not a fan of using history to come to the resurrection or anything like that. I mean, I think there may be certain ways we can get to it. I'm more in line with someone like Dale Allison, who says like the evidence is good enough where like there's no reason you can't believe it, but if you didn't have any other reasons, like any other reasons to believe in Christianity, you're not like irrational for not believing in the resurrection. It's not like the historical evidence is that good or anything. But like I said, I don't want to give my opinions too much right up at the front. But I'll just go through, play the video, and I'm sure I'll have some thoughts. Like I said, I don't really agree with either side, so hopefully that will lead to some good comments on my end. But yeah, we'll just let the video play, and I'll pause it as we go and give my thoughts.
But I have been following you, Gary, for a long time. And so I have a whole bunch of questions I'd love to ask you, but I want to put all my cards on the table. Like, I'm not a Christian. I'm an atheist. I used to be a Christian, but if you're a Calvinist leaning, then I'd say I profess to be a Christian. And one thing that I think Christians like about me is I can sometimes resonate with them. And one thing that I think they would say is that something that apologists, and I know you're a historian, but would you call yourself an apologist as well?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, okay.
Because I would use the history and the philosophy, which is my background.
Right.
I would use it to answer those questions.
Yeah, and so I think, criticism that a lot of Christians might have of apologists like you is that sometimes apologists can sound like politicians. And so when a question is asked, by the time the answer is complete, it's like, what was the question again? You know what I'm saying? Is there a delay?
I think so. But I would say the complaint that somebody, as an historian or philosopher or New Testament scholar, sounds like a politician and goes on, if that's the part of that second question, I think that can be answered in several ways. Make your answers shorter.
Right.
The fact that in politics, we generally don't like one view, but we love another view. So politics are okay with us if it's our view. So I think to say, oh, they sound like politicians is another way to say, I don't like what they're saying. And if that's because they do like some politicians, and if that's what they're saying, then I would say, buckle down and answer the questions.
Yeah.
If you don't like going on and being a politician, then answer the guy's questions. And that's what I would say.
Okay. Yeah. I saying this is because since I have some questions, I'll get right into it. But please just, if you can answer it in one question, or one word answer, that's great for me.
So yeah, I actually appreciate kind of the way Doug started this off. He really laid his cards out on the table, which is obviously good. And I think we saw from Gary Habermas, he already kind of started answering the question a little strange, but I mean, I don't know. I think it started off pretty well, I guess, is what I would get at. I'm kind of glad he kind of laid his cards out there and really, I think Gary understood like where this conversation was kind of headed, and I appreciate like trying to keep the answers short. That's what I do appreciate Doug sometimes. I mean, sometimes I can't stand some of the things he says, and that's fine. I wouldn't assume that he would think I don't know. Doug is who he is. I kind of appreciate he doesn't try and be anything he's not, but I also think he can kind of, no, there's some things I disagree with that. That's besides the point of this video, but yeah, I think he started off well, and it gets right into the questions here. introduction was a little bit long, but
One word answer depends on what the question is.
Yeah, but
Yeah, very few questions I can
I
answer.
understand. But if it's
one-
possible to
in
answer
one
in
word.
one word, then please do. So let's start with the minimal facts, because that's your bread and butter, I think, right? What would you say is the biggest criticism against it, either from non-believers or believers?
Now, how can I answer that yes or no?
No, I'm not asking for yes or no here.
Is that what you're saying?
What's the biggest critique against?
Oh, okay. Then I misunderstood you. The critique of the minimal facts.
Yeah.
Yeah, the definition is I use only the facts.
No, what's the...
see, this was like I already was like, oh my gosh, where are we going? And I know there's a bit of a delay, so that I'm not judging it on that, but just the fact, like, I mean, the question was as clear as day, and I thought it was a really great question to kind of start off when you're having a conversation with an atheist, especially like Doug. That's a reasonable question. Like, what's the biggest critique? Like, you can't think your argument is perfect because clearly not everyone is convinced, and it's like if you can't think of a critique against it, then you just think everyone that disagrees with your argument is like irrational or something. And I don't think that's what Gary Habermas would say, but I don't know. It's really strange that he like Doug clearly like knows what the minimal facts is, like has a very limited amount of time, and asks him like, can you just answer questions and be short? And as soon as he brings this up, he starts explaining what the minimal facts argument is. Like, I don't know. This is where I think Doug also realized, like, come on, like I asked you not to be a politician and you're being a politician. Come on.
The critique against
every critical. What is a critique against it?
Yes.
I think we have a little bit of lag between our voices. I'm not sure, and I'm not hearing all your words. What is the best critique against it?
Yes.
One Christian who doesn't like it, one Christian scholar who doesn't like it, says Habermas only uses a piece of the pie when he could be using the whole pie. Why does he want to tie himself down to a half dozen questions? That's one of the questions I've been hearing lately. Not a half dozen facts. Why do you only want to use 6 facts when you can use dozens of facts? Even according to Bart Ehrman, even according to Maurice Casey, the atheist and agnostic commentators. I think that's a good complaint. I think having the whole pie can be better at times than having a piece of the pie. But I stay with the piece of the pie because I have the advantage of having almost every critical scholar on board with me. I'm not even aware of critical scholars who disagree with the 6 facts. And by the way, just in case somebody's saying this, I get blamed with this. I do not say that the empty tomb is one of the 6 facts. I don't say that. I ever have said that.
Okay.
And that right there, like, come on, that is the definition of a politician's answer. Like, you literally, I mean, come on. I mean, his biggest critique is that he doesn't use more facts, essentially. Like, I mean, he basically said, my biggest critique is that I make it harder on myself than I have to, and my argument still works. Like that's, you're in a job interview or something, and they ask, what's your greatest weakness? And some people say I just, I make it harder on myself, but I still finish my work every single day. I do so well, and it's just like I work too hard. That's my biggest flaw is that I work too hard. Come on. I mean, that's a politician, job interviewer answer right there. You're telling me you've never had someone actually disagree and you think, wow, that really made me think or something? Like, he's been doing this for so long. It's not like he's fresh in the game. I don't know. I couldn't stand that answer. I'm sorry, Dr. Habermas, but that was a bad answer.
Okay, I understand that, question. And I can appreciate that answer. If you had those minimal facts,
yep.
And if, let's say, someone has a naturalistic explanation and another person like yourself has non-naturalistic explanation,
yep.
All else being equal,
yep.
What do you think a person should choose, a naturalistic or a non-naturalistic, if they can both explain the data?
I want to know, or let me ask you, what naturalistic thesis explains all the data?
Okay,
Which
can you
one?
answer my question
Today?
first?
Yeah, I mean, that was just answer Doug's questions. Like, clearly you're the expert here. Doug's not. You know, like he's asking you questions. I think that's fair. Like, if this was an even debate or something like that, like it would be weird for Doug to be asking all the questions. And it's for Doug to be asking all the questions, and not answering any questions. But that's not what this is about or whatever. So I think, and I appreciate Doug for pressing him. But let's kind of keep going.
And then I'll answer yours.
Okay, what question do you want me to answer? Which of those?
If you have two hypotheses or two explanations, one's completely naturalistic and one is not, let's say supernaturalistic.
Yep.
And they both explain all the data and everything else is all equal. Do you think a person should choose the naturalistic explanation or the supernatural explanation?
I think whichever one says they answer all the facts, the two should dialogue until they find out which one has an edge. Given about when I do this big thing on the resurrection, I have 140 questions to discuss. I think if someone's going to come up and say, I can explain.
Yeah, I wish he would answer the question. I mean, if I were to answer Doug's question, I mean, I think all things given the same, sure, the natural explanation, and that's why I would say, yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. If you have if they both are equal, then the natural seems to have the higher prior probability. I don't know why. That's very hard to answer, honestly. But for myself, like I said, I think there's other factors besides the historical evidence that lead me to accept the resurrection as true, not. So, yeah, so I don't think they're equal. But if it wasn't for these other factors, I definitely wouldn't come to see the minimal facts and wouldn't believe in the resurrection. That's not why I believe in it. So, yeah, so I pretty much agree with where Doug's going, and I think Doug's clearly asking some leading questions, but I know Dr. Habermas was prepared for this, like Doug's trying to get somewhere, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think he made it pretty clear. So just answer the questions and see where it goes, because I think he's getting to some interesting things, some kind of flaws in the argument, which is interesting, let's go.
All this data with a natural thesis, okay, I'm open. But I'll say two things. I really am open, but I'll say two things. Number one, prove it answers it as well as mine does.
Yeah, and hold on. Sorry, I just had to pause for a second, but we're back, so let's kind of just keep playing where we left off.
And number two, what if I have additional information that there is a supernatural world? What if, for example, near-death experiences indicate that there's an afterlife, which I think is a very, very strong thesis. If I already know there's an afterlife.
Yeah, I understand.
Wait a minute. Let me keep it to a sentence or two.
Okay.
If there's an afterlife, and if I'm proclaiming that the resurrection is an example of the highly evidenced afterlife, I think both those possibilities should be considered equally, because if there's an afterlife, I want to know if Jesus is part of it. And the other guy says, no, the natural world is better. Okay, one question I would ask is, what's your evidence for naturalism? I can give evidence for supernaturalism. What's your evidence for naturalism?
So Dale Allison,
give me a good argument for naturalism.
Dale.
Yeah, see, I don't understand this at all. Like, what is going on at this point? Like, why is Dr. Habermas asking, what's your evidence for naturalism? Like, I don't know. It's like it's a debate or something, Like, Pinecreek doesn't agree with your argument. Just answer his questions and see where we go. Like, if you're really I don't even understand what the point of this part was at all. Like, what's your evidence for naturalism? I mean, I'm not a naturalist, but I mean, my evidence for naturalism is my hand is natural. It exists. I don't see a ghost in front of me. You know what I mean? Like, and then you want to get into this whole NDEs, near-death experience. That's a whole nother can of worms that, I mean, I don't know exactly where I fall on, I mean, I believe that supernatural exists in a sense, I'm fine. I don't know. Like, I think these words can get charged and stuff. I'm not trying to get in that whole conversation right now. That's not really what I want to talk about, because I don't think that's what Gary Habermas's argument is. But yeah, it's just, I don't even know why. Yeah, it's just like, do you really want to get in that right now? You clearly know you have a very limited amount of time. Are you going to really get into it? There's plenty of people who are naturalists, right? It's not like unreasonable to believe in naturalism. So what are you getting at? You know, I appreciate Pinecreek. Let's move on. There are naturalist explanations, and he gives what Dale Allison gives in his, because Dale Allison is really fair with the evidence. So when in his book and in a lot of his interviews, especially the one he did on digital gnosis with Nathan's channel, which Doug is referencing here, he gives what he thinks is one of the better, naturalist explanations of the historical data that we have. And yeah, let's see where I go.
Dale Allison, whom you know, right?
Dale Allison, what?
Dale Allison, whom you know.
Yeah. He's a friend. Yes.
Yeah, he says that you can give a natural explanation for the minimal facts that you present. And off the top of my head, I think he says something like, you can say that maybe Peter or Mary had a grief hallucination, and then that turned into social contagion. And he said something like, if someone in a small town says, I saw a Bigfoot, well, what do you know? Over the next few months, oh, I saw a Bigfoot too. And you end up having this type of naturalistic explanation that doesn't require any supernatural explanation, because all you're doing is explaining these minimal facts. You don't need, right? So what would you say to Dale Allison about that?
No, I think it's an excellent question, and I really would love to hear what Dr. Habermas says to this. It's like I said, if without this, and even if you think supernatural exists, it's still rare or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's still this or that. Like, it's more, do you think that the resurrection itself and like Christianity being true and things is what leads you to accept it, not just like a Hindu or something. I mean, they might even accept, and that's what something Dale Allison will say too. Like, it doesn't, just because even if you think the resurrection is true, it doesn't even mean that like Christianity in like any sort of sense is true. Because like there are Hindus that can accept that God raised Jesus from the dead. They can literally say we accept that wholeheartedly, and it doesn't really affect our worldview. So it's like, just because NDEs are gonna lead you to think the minimal facts lead to the resurrection, like, I don't understand. So like Doug gave a naturalist explanation, and it's something that a scholar he's familiar with has presented as a reasonable option, and I'd love to hear what he actually has to say, but I'm worried he's gonna kind of give another politician answer, which is kind of frustrating.
A couple things. You're not putting Dale Allison in context, because Dale Allison, in his two big books on the resurrection, he does accept the minimal facts. He says you got to be open to challenges, which I agree.
And then when he says that, he does accept the minimal facts. Like, I'm trying not to hate on Gary Habermas here, and I hopefully can have some critiques of Doug, but I think he's doing a pretty great job, to be honest. And like, he does accept the minimal facts. I mean, Doug accepts the minimal facts. Like, when he says he accepts the minimal facts, he's saying it in a way that I think a lot of people hear it, he accepts the argument as good. And that's not the case. He doesn't think that like the minimal facts alone lead to believing in the resurrection, but he accepts that the minimal facts are facts. I mean, like you said, like Gary Habermas, no one's arguing that these things aren't historical facts accepted by the majority of scholars, or however he puts it. So I hate that he kind of like added that part in there, because I think it was a bit misleading. And I think Gary Habermas kind of does that a lot of times too, like says things that are intentionally just kind of throws a little spice on there that make things sound like he's not lying, and he's not like maybe even purposely being deceptive, but it adds that little spice on there that I think a lot of people do take what he's saying as different. But then you can go back like, well, if you really look at what I said, I just said that. So I don't know. Yeah, that's a small critique or a small point, but I think it was important. Like, why do you have to add that part? Doug didn't even deny that Dale Allison accepts the minimal facts.
But he accepts the facts. And secondly, he believes that Jesus appeared to disciples after his death by crucifixion, because he says, like I did, that there's evidence for an afterlife and a supernatural world. In fact, the last time I was with Dale, we were having coffee and a long talk of a couple hours. And I sat down at the table, and before I even sat all the way down, I said, Dale, you know what my favorite sentence is in only the first book was out on the resurrection. I said, you know my favorite sentence is? And he said, what's that? And I said, here's the sentence. It's a pretty close paraphrase. He said, I have no doubt that after Jesus' death by crucifixion, Jesus appeared again to his disciples. That's Dale Allison. I can give you chapter and verse if you want.
Yeah, but Dale Allison will...
And I'm really, yeah, it's like, I don't... But Dale Allison will say he believes what Gary's saying. He believes, sure, not only because of the historical evidence or this minimal facts argument. And he's not pointing that out. I think he's doing that on purpose because he knows that Dale Allison doesn't accept his argument. He might accept the minimal facts as being facts, but he does not accept Gary Habermas's argument. That's the issue at hand. And he's conflating these two things. Starting to think it's on purpose because he knows Dale Allison, they're friends. I admit that. I'm sure they are actually friends. I'm sure he's not lying about that. I don't think Gary Habermas is a liar. I just think, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like a bubble that he's in or whatever, or because I don't know, but it seems strange the way he's portraying this in a way that just, I know he knows that it's not exactly right though. That's the issue.
Also say that we don't know the nature of these appearances.
That's fine, but that's beside the point.
No, it isn't. That's a huge point because
all right, let's debate this.
Pentecostals today, I think you know this.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad Doug is raising this. I didn't even think about that right at the start. But this whole, like, yeah, Dale Allison is not as confident as someone like Gary Habermas that these appearances that people saw of Jesus were Jesus walking around in his body. And I'm like I said, I really think Dale Allison hits a lot of this out of the park. I don't agree with everything he says or anything like that, but I agree. Like, from the biblical evidence, it's unclear what the appearances were like. Like, yeah, it's unclear. And then, yeah, so I'm curious where Doug's going to go with this. And I appreciate that Doug's familiar with Dale Allison's work here. I think it's a good kind of common ground where that's why, I mean, there's a lot to like about Dale Allison. And yeah. So I think it's just really kind of interesting where this is going, but we'll see. I don't know. We'll see where this goes.
Pentecostals today will say that they saw Jesus, that Jesus appeared to them at 11:10 a.m. during the worship service.
Wait, but
that's right.
Yeah, but that's just.
That's right.
But do we have data for one kind of appearance or another? Let me make a point. If Jesus appeared to somebody in whatever kind of body, and if you have data that he appeared, that's data for the resurrection. And by the way, Dale Allison says it both ways.
Well, hang on, Gary.
Dale Allison says,
are you saying a minimal fact is that Jesus appeared to people in a body?
I think the minimal facts showed that Jesus appeared. Dale
right,
Allison
but not in a body, right?
I do argue for the bodily resurrection, but I don't usually use the minimal facts.
I know, but
I think the minimal facts will prove that.
Do you say that is it a minimal fact based on the consensus of New Testament scholarship that Jesus appeared to people in a body?
Okay, I've got a published article from a liberal press where I surveyed a bunch of scholars, and I can only argue for the ones I've surveyed, but there are dozens and dozens. 75% of the scholars said they believe Jesus appeared in some way after his death. And 75% of those who said he appeared bodily. So that's the answer to your two questions.
Yeah, I'm not sure where this seems confusing. And I don't think anywhere that Gary Habermas said that the bodily resurrection, like appearance, was a minimal fact. Because he didn't say that. And I think Doug either misheard him or I don't know. There's finally a critique of Doug. Jeez. But yeah, I think he's kind of pressing him on something he definitely didn't say, because Gary Habermas made it clear that he thinks like his argument leads to a bodily appearance, which I don't necessarily agree with, but he's not saying it's a minimal fact, which Doug is trying to press him as maybe saying, and that's not what he's saying. So, yeah, but why he had to add the word liberal in there? That drives me nuts when people liberal, but whatever. That's another beside the point. But I'm not sure where he's going with like these people believe in bodily like. But this is because of the minimal facts. That's what we're talking about here.
If you like 75% for he appeared, and 75% of those who said he appeared bodily, I think those are large percentages.
Okay, so you're saying that a minimal fact is that Jesus appeared to people in bodily form.
I think that's where the argument heads, yes. But
no, not head.
Yeah, see, Doug heard him there, and I think this is where Doug's being a little. I don't really appreciate where Doug's at. So I don't know if he's trying to catch him or I don't know. Maybe he heard it differently too. I'm sure he's pretty like Doug's been talking about this. Like I don't know. I think he missed the point. This is a miscommunication, which is kind of frustrating because Gary Habermas is not saying that the bodily appearance is a minimal fact, and Doug keeps repeating that. So that's kind of frustrating a little bit.
But as a minimal fact, you're saying you're jumping to the conclusion.
It comes from my arguments, but I want to cite Dale because he's your hero here, and you brought him up. So Dale says the New Testament view is that he appeared bodily. He says, but he said I'm rather Platonic. I don't need bodily appearances. I'm fine with them, but I don't need them. He said, but if he appeared without a body, he still appeared. That's still a resurrection. Now, if somebody says I had a dream last night or I was praying last night and he appeared in my bedroom, we'd have to talk about that. But I wouldn't want evidence. I'm just saying, if Dale is your man, Dale says disembodied or embodied. And that was what my survey said. Once again, 75% of the scholars, left to right, say Jesus appeared. And 75% of those who said he appeared bodily. So that's 75%.
I would love to. One thing about Gary Habermas too, he just throws things out there a lot. That where's he getting these numbers from? I'm not saying he's lying or making it up, but I don't know. After a million times, it's kind of hard to know. He seems like to let you know or something, and it's like I don't know. These numbers seem to be kind of coming out of thin air, to be honest, but. Maybe they're not. I don't know.
50%.
25% said he appeared. 25% said he really appeared, but non-bodily. I'm not going to say the second group does not believe in that's not my view. And I think the facts evidence bodily resurrection. And the minimal facts evidence bodily resurrection. It's clearly the New Testament view, and that is the majority critical view today, even from non-Christian
let's move on.
Scholars.
Again, I got so many questions, and so I want to keep them short. The answers.
Yeah, before we move, that was a bit of a mess for sure. It's frustrating because I don't think you really answered any questions, or I don't know. I think there were some good questions that could have led to some interesting answers, but I don't know. Maybe
if you can. Have you ever met a person who had nothing to do with Christianity? Their parents weren't Christians. They became a PhD historian. They looked at the evidence of the resurrection, and they became a Christian because of the historical evidence for the resurrection. Do you know anybody? Because I want to interview that person.
I don't know how. Sometimes I hear this question a lot, and sometimes I hate it, and sometimes I think it's interesting. So, I mean, I don't. Like I said, my view is that you're not really the historical evidence alone isn't really going to convince anybody. But then like saying like PhD thing, like some people, like clearly Doug knows that there are some people who say they were convinced by the historical evidence, but they're not PhD scholars or whatever, you know. So I don't know. Before it's really like a weird question. I think it kind of sounds. I think the question sounds better than it is. And I don't think like. I mean, it would mean something for sure, though. I do think like it would mean a lot for the argument if freaking all the, you know, historians that were seriously involved in this were just all Christians, and like maybe a lot of them weren't Christians to start with, and you know they became Christians, and like everybody who was a Christian who studies this stuff like stays a Christian because the evidence is so good. Like it is pretty wild. Like not only Yeah, now that I think about it, though, not only are you not really seeing people study this and like get convinced as they're studying it, but you do see a lot of people like become non-Christians as historians, like Bart Ehrman or something. There's a lot more people like him than there are people that Doug's asking about. That's for sure. And so that might be a knock against, just the historical evidence being so good. Like I said, I think the evidence is fine. Like, I think there's plenty of evidence that makes it reasonable if you have other reason. If other things are drawing you to Christianity, I don't think you should like look at the historical evidence and be like, whoa, there's no reason to think that like it's not like there's no reason to think even Jesus existed and like so that would where the historical evidence would really hurt my belief, but I don't think that's the case. But I don't think the evidence is so amazing like Doug's saying. So I don't know if they're really. Yeah, it's interesting because Doug, like I said, and he has been asking who would, if there was somebody like this, he would definitely get him on a show and try to make him look stupid. That's the thing, and that's what Doug can do that sometimes. I don't think he does that all the time, but if there was someone like that, he would be chomping at the bit. So I guarantee he has been looking for someone like what he's asking for, and I mean, they're not running, they're not a million of them out there. That's for sure.
I can give you a list of PhDs in either straight history or in New Testament history, but history. Dale Allison called himself an historian. Bart Ehrman called himself an historian. And Bart Ehrman does not believe in the resurrection.
Did you understand my question? My question is, do you know anyone who was not a Christian?
Yeah, I appreciate Doug, like realizing he's getting off topic. Let's stay on topic. There's very limited amount of time.
They were converted.
That they became a PhD in history, and then they looked at the evidence for the resurrection, and then they became a Christian because of that evidence for the resurrection. Do you know anybody like that?
Yeah, I think I could send you a few names if you want me to.
Sure, I'd love it.
There are a number of them. Now, there is a difference. If this is what you're getting.
What? I want to see this. If Gary Habermas sends Doug a few names, like he's saying he will here, that would surprise me, honestly. I have a feeling, like I said, not that he's lying. There might be people, and I think it'll just be like, oh, well, they're not this or that. They were Christians to start out with, or they were Christians growing up and then became non-Christians as they were, like in their undergrad or something. And then as they studied more, they became Christians again or something, But I doubt it was because of the historical evidence was what did the work,
Getting at. There is a difference between those who say, Allison's an example, there's a difference between those who say the data are really good and maybe don't answer the question of whether they themselves believe in it. But they'll say the data are very good.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking that it actually convinced them and they became Christians.
Because of the resurrection.
Because of the evidence, the historical evidence.
Yes, I think there are examples. Like I said, I want to differentiate that so you don't say to me later, no, New Testament historians are not historians.
Okay, you can send that to me later through Josh. I'd love to interview them. So,
yeah, you send me an email when this is over, and I'll send you some people you can interview.
We'll see.
Because I have found none. I've had this challenge for years, and I have found none. Some people mention dead people, but I want someone alive so I can interview. But
well, that's probably a prerequisite.
Would you admit to the Christian?
Appreciate it. Got a little laugh though. I'm hoping that'll lead to maybe the second half of this or however much we have left. Not exactly sure. I don't think there's actually too much left looking at the timestamps of in Pinecreek's video. So yeah, I'm not sure, but I appreciate a little laugh. Maybe we'll get a good little ending here. They'll kind of break. Maybe it won't be so much tension because I do think there's a bit of tension building up.
Christian audience that things like in the Gospel of John when it says that Jesus said that I and the Father are one, that those are not facts based on consensus of historians?
I'd never even addressed that.
I know, but I'm at. Would you say that that's a fact?
Let me make a stronger one. I think the clearest case of Jesus doing that kind of thing is in Mark 14, 61 to 64, where the high priest asks, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" And he says, ego eimi, in the Greek, I am. And henceforth you'll see the Son of Man riding on the clouds, which is only a prerogative of God in Scripture, and seated on the right hand of God. And the high priest tears his garment, an official proclamation of blasphemy, and says, this man is blasphemed. What do you
I know the
think?
text, but that's not my question. My
Yeah,
question is,
I don't know where Pinecreek's going at. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I hate Gary Habermas' answer. I feel like he just goes off track, but I kind of see what's happening though. Like Pinecreek's question here seems kind of out of left field. Like, and it seems clear that Gary Habermas is trying to avoid like going down a path where Pinecreek wants him to go, and then he's gonna end up saying something. You know, like, but that's just not the way to have a conversation. You could tell this started off as Gary Habermas has like his thing, and he's not gonna say anything against it. Nothing. He's not gonna like open up. I don't expect him. You know what I mean? Like, this is a random YouTube stream with an atheist that he doesn't even know. You know what I mean? Like, I do wish they could be more honest, but yeah, I don't know. It's definitely tough. I'm kind of like just thinking this through, and that's what I kind of expected to happen because I hadn't pre-watched this or anything. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. I don't really know what the point of Doug's question was, but I think not knowing the point of the question, though, instead of trying to like head it off, instead of trying to head it off and like, I think maybe I know where he's going, let me say, just answer the question. Just, you know, is that a fact that's accepted by most critical historical scholars? No. Just say that no, and move on. See what happens. You know, like, just be honest. No, it's not.
Do you think that based on the consensus of historians, they would say that's a fact in history?
I don't know. I have not studied what the consensus of historians think about John 10.
Okay.
I and the Father one. I do not know their view. That's not my area.
Would you say
interviewed.
Okay, that's a fair answer.
I would think they probably wouldn't. I
Okay.
would think they probably would not like the verse in John, but the one in Mark is entirely open, and he even goes further than John does.
Would you say
and Gary Habermas is like trying to say like he's heading Pinecreek off and thinking that he's going down some route like low Christology and all this Christology questions. I can tell, you know, you can tell like, well, I got one better, you know, like, but that's not even what Pinecreek is getting at. And I think if you're just honest and even just say, you know, I haven't studied, that's not my area, I haven't studied John 10, I don't know the history, but, you know, my leaning would be no, you know, probably not. And move on. You know, don't add something from Mark. That's not what he's asking. Just answer the question. If there was 2 hours planned or whatever, and it's just two guys sitting around having a conversation, it's one thing. But clearly there's very limited time. You can see Canadian Catholic over here like getting super uncomfortable too, which is kind of funny, but just, yeah, so just answer the question, you know, come on.
That based on the consensus of historians that they would say it's a fact that Jesus walked on water?
Probably not. It is a consensus of New Testament historians and critical historians who, you have to realize, critical historians who look at these things are very rare compared, because it's not their area. They're doing American history, North American history, Europe.
Yeah, and that's like it. I mean, that's one that's like, come on, Pinecreek, what are you asking? And like, you will, I mean, even Pinecreek will admit that like the critical historians like are gonna look at something like walking on water and give it a low prior. Methodological naturalism is gonna lead to them saying that's probably not a historical fact, even if most of them are Christians. You know, like most of the Christian ones are even gonna be fine with saying that's not like a historical fact. Because it's so much, like, yeah, as I'm thinking, like, there's so much, like, it's at least, like, authorship of the God, like, just admit it, Gary God. But I think, and this has been interesting, I heard in another, they were talking about, since Gary Habermas works at Liberty University, and they have a statement of faith about inerrancy and all these things, I think that leads him to having to be a bit worried about how to answer some of these questions and stuff, and I don't think he's, like, worried necessarily that like if he says something, because I'm sure he has clout at the school and they're not going to get rid of it anyway. There's a lot of people that go there just to take Gary Habermas's class, and he's a big name. Sure. So it's not like worried as much as like it's in the back of his head and it's been ingrained, and he like accept his statement of faith, and it kind of draws a wall, I think, in his reasoning.
European history, everything. But I will tell you this. I just read a critic recently who said,
But I don't want to sound too much, as I said it too. I'm like kind of psychoanalyzing him and psychologizing or psychoanalyzing, whatever the word is. I don't want to seem too much like that, but just that's the way I'm perceiving it. I think, yeah, because he's just not giving straight answers. Like, it's just so simple, and let's just move on. Let's see where we're trying to go.
all critical scholars, and I don't think it's that unanimous, but this critic said, all critical scholars today believe Jesus healed and exercised. Now, that's not walking on water, but that's a comment about healing and exercising. No, I don't think the majority of scholars, critical, non-Christian, if you want, scholars.
What? I think all the critical scholars say that the reports of the healing and the exorcisms are credible. Like, people were saying these things, and he's like, Jesus being known as a healer and an exorcist is a historical fact. That these like reports of this were going around, and people thought this about Jesus. But like I said, like a lot of, I mean, no naturalist can say that they think that actually happened, you know, like, so, and I'm not saying like they do it for that reason, like they're a naturalist first, but you know, it's just like I'm a Christian and then look at the evidence and say, okay, this lines up, you know, this doesn't make me need to drop my belief, but it's not the reason I believe. And but the way he said, all these critical scholars think that Jesus was actually an exorcist, like, I mean, there's plenty of Christians that don't even think that exorcisms are real and stuff. Like, what?
Scholars would say
Okay.
Jesus walked on water. I
Yeah.
don't think they would agree.
Yeah, I would agree. From my understanding,
but that's not my area.
I know. But the point of I have all my cards on the table, full disclosure. The point of this is that I bet you if we were to put everything that you would say is a minimal fact on one side of a piece of paper and everything that the consensus of historians would say is not a fact, we would have a short little piece on the left and a long list of non-facts on the right. Would you agree with that?
Let me tell you why that's a non sequitur. I only do 6 facts. 6 by definition. Remember, I already said, and I'm glad I said it before you said that. I would, a whole pie view, all the facts we can get from the New Testament, is more than 6. So I realize I'm only using 6. From those 6, I only argue death and resurrection. Sometimes I argue that he claimed to be deity. Deity, death, resurrection.
I understand all that. You don't have to tell me this because I know this already.
Why are you asking me questions about things I haven't studied, and do I believe in the majority of this and that? And that's not what I'm trying to argue.
Well, no. In order for you to have determined what is a minimal fact,
yeah. See, I think that actually points out a lot. Like Gary Habermas's response there, like, "Why are you asking me these questions?" Then that clearly shows that like Gary Habermas is not hearing Doug's question and answering the question. He's hearing Doug's question, thinking in his head, where is this guy trying to go? What point is he trying to make with that question? Why is he asking that question? And he's trying to head him off. And like say, oh, he's trying to make this point, you know, about the Christology. I think that pointed out a lot. Like, ooh, he brought up John 10. That must mean he's questioning something about Christology. So let me give him a better one from Mark 8 or whatever that's, you know, more historically reliable. But that's not really what Doug's getting at. You know, he's getting at a different point. And maybe this is something that, since Gary Habermas probably has conversations with less critical people than, I can't imagine he's having too many like really conversations like this, which I'm sure this is interesting. I'm actually glad I'm reviewing this because I think this is pretty interesting. And I don't think he's having these type conversations very often where someone's really challenging him. He's a big name. He's an older guy. Like, he's been around. People respect him. When most people bring him on their like YouTube channel or podcast or whatever, they're, oh, I love your argument, blah, this or that. Or they might have some critiques, but they're not pressing him like Doug's trying to press him. But I think it's clear that it's like, now he's like, come on, I don't, you know, like almost like, well then, if that's not where you're going, where are you going? You know, and the whole, you know, not supposed to like jump in front of somebody in a conversation. You just be talking. If you don't trust them and you don't want to have the conversation, just don't have it. You know, don't give politician answers and try and answer the very least you can. It's not a debate. Like, just see where it goes.
Have to exclude what's not a fact based on consensus, yes?
Okay. All
Right?
right. We're getting closer to something here. If you produce, I'll tell you what I believe about that. If you produced a list of 20, let's say, what you think are contradictions in the Gospels. I'll make it hard, not just differences, let's say contradictions in the Gospels. You're going to find 20 of them, but they don't mess with my 6 minimal facts. I'm going to say you keep what you think are contradictions, and I'll keep the death and resurrection of Jesus based on the minimal facts. And if Jesus is died and raised again, we could go after and discuss whether the other ones are contradictions later, but you're not messing with my conclusion. You're not disproving my view that he died on the cross and was raised from the dead and was seen by his apostles afterwards, with Dale Allison concedes.
Okay,
So
I want
to say, yeah, but look at all the stuff in the other gospels. I'm not doing all the other facts in the gospels.
I want to
6 for a reason.
I want to move.
And I think something that Pinecreek didn't bring up, I'm thinking of something as he's talking or whatever, and Pinecreek doesn't bring this up. I think it would be interesting, not like the whole like 2 list thing. It's a little strange, like more things that are not facts, whatever. You know, I don't really know what Pinecreek's getting at. I mean, there's always going to be like more untrue things than true things. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the way it works. You can keep coming up with a million untrue things. You just keep making new thing up, change it a little bit. It's still untrue. You know, there's only one truth. So that's weird. I don't know what he's getting at with that. But what I think would be interesting is, and this is something as I was kind of reflecting too, I forgot to bring up, but about the whole minimal facts argument in general. Yeah, he takes these 6 minimal facts and but what if you add in all the other, like plenty of other things that like are just as much supported by the critical scholars and are facts, just in the same way his 6 minimal facts are, but like, you know, that Jesus was reported as walking on water, but probably didn't walk on water. You know, that didn't happen. That's a minimal fact. Does the resurrection explain why that's in the gospel? I would say not really. You know, that kind of cries out for like kind of an additional, you need to add on to the resurrection explanation to kind of why would they report something that probably didn't happen, or, you know, are there differences in the gospels that are unreconcilable? Most critical scholars, the same ones he's pointing to that champion his minimal facts, are going to say, yes, you know, there's unreconcilable differences or contradictions, whatever you want to call them. Does the resurrection explain that? I don't think it does, right? Like, so I think that's a crucial point. You know, when he takes his minimal facts, but I see the minimal facts as kind of like cherry picking, you know, like why I know, yeah, it seems weird. Like, you could add in there are other facts that are just as supported, so shouldn't you, I don't know why you can just take these 6, you know, it's like, I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'll touch on it more as I kind of think this through too, as we go on more questions. I'm not too sure what more is going on. It seems like we're kind of devolving a bit. I'm not sure. So we're going a good bit longer. I'm not sure how much more. I might end it here. I feel like I've had some good points. We'll see what more. I don't know.
Move on to the principle of analogy, because I think that's what's a big hindrance to non-believers, even Jews and Muslims who accept the supernatural. They still
yeah. And I actually did see this part. I came in late, and I did see this part where it's talking about the flying man experiment. And I don't know. I'm not gonna. I want to kind of end it here. I think it's a decent length. I think my video is already pretty long. I don't want to go over the whole thing. I probably should play it on like 0.5 speed. But if you appreciate this and you want me to touch on the rest, like the flying man stuff, I think that the way, maybe if you did this at the beginning, it'd be one thing. But like I said, if you watched it to the end, I really, really appreciate it. Let me know in the comments. I'll react to the rest of it. I know I ended it right here. I'll see in my thing. It's at 57 minutes or whatever, and I'll touch on the rest. I don't have a problem. I don't think it's useless or anything. But I know Doug had like a little after show, and Nathan talked about this too. So yeah, this part is, I don't know. I think we touched on some good stuff, and I want to kind of leave it there if that makes sense. But I hope you appreciated this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, like, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. Really appreciate you watching. And if you haven't checked out my book review of Dr. Chris Keith's book, I'm going to be posting one of those a week. video number 2 on chapter 1. The first video was just the introduction to the series and talking about the introduction of the book. But the next chapter, chapter 1 video, will be up Monday. I've got most of that done. I just need to record it. But yeah, I appreciate you watching. If you stuck around to the end, thank you so much. Let me know in the comments that you stuck around to the end, and I'll give you 1,000,000 Bergen bucks. That's what I'll call them. Nathan Nichols, Pine Points. We got Bergen bucks over here. So if you watch to the end and you let me know you want your Bergen bucks, yeah, leave a comment. Give me my Bergen bucks. I appreciate it. And see you next time.